1, The First Age, Chapter 1 of Tuor and His Coming to Gondolin. You'll remember that in the published Silmarillion, Chapter 23, it's titled Of Tuor and the Fall of Gondolin. That one is actually the complete story, whereas the version that appears in this book ends once Tuor reaches Gondolin, and that's it. The story stops there. Why? Well, Tolkien wrote the original complete story in the 1910s, and then he started to rewrite it as this version many decades later, probably 1951. But for whatever reason, he stopped. A lot of his writings were like that. I mean, there were always a lot of different versions and fragments of his stories at different points of revision floating around in his notebooks. But the fun thing about this version is that it's far more detailed than the one in the published Silmarillion. I mean, it really makes you feel like you're there. So, the story starts with Rian, wife of Tuor, and once she learns of the Nirnaeth Arnödiad, she becomes distraught and wanders into the wild. But, thank goodness, some Sindar elves find her and take her in. She then gives birth to her son, Tuor, and she tells the elves, "Foster him and keep him hidden in your care, for I forebode that great good for elves and men shall come from him." The elves agree, and from them she learns that Tuor actually died in battle. So she becomes completely inconsolable, wanders away up to the mound of the dead on the battlefield, and lies down and dies. But meanwhile, Tuor grows up among the elves and learns all of their ways. But life is quite dangerous in the land of Hithlum because Morgoth has given it to the Easterlings. And these guys enslave the people of the House of Hador, steal their land and property, and orcs are just roaming around freely, capturing elves to be sent as slaves to Angband. I mean, it's a disaster zone. So, Annael, the leader of the group of elves that Tuor lives with, proposes that they get out of there and go south. Now, Tuor is a hot-headed teenager at this point, and he wants to go and avenge his people. But Annael says, no, you're not supposed to do that just yet. Come on, let's go find the secret gate of the Noldor so we can escape Hithlum unseen. Turgon built it a long time ago. And then Tuor asks him, who Turgon is, suggesting that maybe he can go and ask him for help to avenge his family. And Annael's like, no, he's far away in a hidden kingdom. They won't even tell us where it is. I mean, some of the Noldor from Gondolin are living down at the havens of Sirion, so you might be able to ask those guys. But come on, we're wasting time. We gotta get out of here. So the group sets out, but a bunch of orcs and Easterlings attack them, and they scatter. Tuor stays and fights bravely, but he's eventually captured and brought as a slave to the chief of the Easterlings, and he's held captive for 3 years and treated very poorly. But one day, as he is sent out with some other thralls to do some work, he escapes and goes back to where he used to live with the elves. And he stays there alone for 4 years, all the while randomly terrorizing and killing Easterlings. But he's not going around to seek revenge so much as to try to find the secret gate of the Noldor. And meanwhile, Ulmo knows where Tuor is, and he foresees that Tuor will play a big part in history. So, one day, Ulmo puts it in Tuor's heart to leave Hithlum, and he enchants a stream to lead him westward, all the way to the Ered Lomin. And Tuor follows the stream up to the mountains until it suddenly disappears into darkness under an arch in a wall of rock. And it's here that he comes across 2 elves. And he marveled, for they were fairer and more fell to look upon because of the light of their eyes than any of the elven folk that he had yet known. Their names are Gelmir and Arminas, of the people of Finarfin. Tuor asks them how to find the gate of the Noldor, and they tell him, he's found it. He's right there. So they guide him through the darkness with a blue Noldoran lamp that cannot be quenched by wind or water. But because they have an urgent errand to attend to somewhere else, they have to leave him, and so he goes the rest of the way by himself. Now, we actually see their errand in the Silmarillion, chapter 21 of Turin Turambar. They're the messengers who tell Orodreth to hide Nargothrond again. Anyway, Tuor continues on through the darkness until he finally sees light. He follows the stream through a deep ravine that faces west, and when he comes out of it into the open, all the mist from the rushing water forms rainbows. So he names the place Cirith Ninniach, the Rainbow Cleft. And as he keeps going towards the sea, the channel grows wider, eventually becoming the Firth of Drengist. But then he suddenly hears the call of seagulls, a bird that he has never seen before. And remember, he's never been to the ocean. So he's curious. He climbs up a cliff and follows them back up the ravine until he sees a great wave come in from the sea and crash into the river that's flowing out. So the birds basically saved him from crazy high tide. Close call. He then turns southward into the borders of Nevrast, where Turgon and his people used to live before they went to Gondolin. It's here that he sees the ocean in its full glory for the very first time. It is said that he was the first of men to reach the great sea, and that none save the Eldar have ever felt more deeply the longing that it brings. He spends the spring and summer in Nevrast, enjoying the mild weather and the plentiful hunting. He explores the land for a bit, finding evidence of the Noldor who used to live there. Tuor found often winding stairs cut in the living stone, and by the water edge were ruined quays built of great blocks hewn from the cliffs, where elven ships had once been moored. But time goes by, and as autumn approaches, a flock of 7 swans flies down to him, and they basically serve as a sign to him that he's hung around in the same place for too long. They start to fly south, and he follows them, traveling for a week down the shoreline. He finally sees Turgon's former city of Vinyamar. There it stood, desolate but enduring, high upon great terraces that looked towards the sea. Tuor slowly makes his way up the hill and enters the city, and the swans show him where to find the great hall. And as he walks in, he's just awed by its majesty and grandeur. He approaches the old stone throne, and as he looks up, a beam of light from the setting sun shines in to reveal, hanging on the wall, a shield, a shirt of chainmail, a helmet, and a long sword. The shield is blue with a picture of a swan's wing on it. Then Tuor says out loud, "By this token I will take these arms unto myself, and upon myself whatsoever doom they bear." So he puts everything on and walks outside to face the setting sun. And he knew not that in that hour he appeared as one of the mighty of the west, and fit to be the father of the kings of men beyond the sea, as it was indeed his doom to be. And the swans do him honor by each giving him a feather, which he puts into his helmet. Then they fly away. He walks down to the beach, and as the sun is setting, a great cloud covers it, and he can see a huge wave rolling towards the shore. And out of the wave stands Ulmo himself. A tall crown he wore like silver, from which his long hair fell down as foam glimmering in the dusk, and as he cast back the grey mantle that hung about him like a mist, behold, he was clad in a gleaming coat, close-fitted as the mail of a mighty fish, and in a kirtle of deep green that flashed and flickered with sea fire as he strode slowly towards the land. Tuor, needless to say, is overcome with fear. That would be a pretty freaky sight. But Ulmo tells him not to be afraid. He then tells Tuor to go to Gondolin and seek out Turgon. Ulmo tells him that his power is receding from Middle-earth right now because Morgoth is gaining strength, but that the last hope for the Noldor lies in Tuor, and that his fate requires him to go to Gondolin as Ulmo's messenger. He gives Tuor a magical cloak that he has to use to keep himself completely covered until he finds Turgon. And Tuor asks how he'll know what to say to Turgon once he finds him, and Ulmo tells him that he will put the right words into his mouth. And then a great violent storm suddenly picks up, and Ulmo tells Tuor one last thing, that he'll send someone to guide him to Gondolin. Then Tuor quickly climbs up a cliff and goes back to the Great Hall to take shelter from the storm. And the next day, he goes out and looks down on one of the lower terraces and sees an elf. He suddenly calls out, "Welcome, Voronwe. I await you." And Voronwe is like, "Wait a minute, you're not an elf? And how do you know my name?" Then Tuor explains how Ulmo came to him, and Voronwe agrees to lead him to the hidden city. Like, oh, this is a mission from Ulmo. Okay, this is important. So they set out into the wilderness, and Voronwe tells Tuor that he was one of the messengers that Turgon had sent out earlier to sail to Valinor to ask the Valar for help. He describes how he spent 7 years sailing the Great Sea, but never even came close to the west. And once he and his crew decided to turn back to Middle-earth, a great storm sank the ship and killed everyone except him. He then was carried by a great wave that set him down onto the shore of Nevrast, which is where Tuor finds him. They make their way through the wild, unseen because of Tuor's magic cloak. And the weather starts to get really cold because an early winter sets in. And when they get to the pool of Ivrin, Voronwe is greatly dismayed because it's now defiled and desolate. Because remember, Ulmo's power is receding. They even find the giant claw marks of Glaurung frozen in the mud and leading away south. We know where he was going. They also see Turin himself run past the pool in great distress. He cries out the names of Ivrin, Beleg, Gwyndor, Finduilas, but he doesn't see Tuor and Voronwe. And as we know, this is as close as the cousins, Turin and Tuor, are ever going to get to meeting each other. So they continue on, but the winter is just getting worse and worse, and their food is starting to run out. They are absolutely miserable. But they slog on, and at one point they see a band of orcs huddled around a campfire. And at this point, Tuor is so cold and hungry, he's like, I'm gonna kill the orcs, take their fire, and maybe I'll eat them. And Voronwe's like, are you out of your mind? It's against the law of Gondolin to approach the gate while being chased by enemies. If you cause a ruckus now, I'm leaving you here, so snap out of it. And Tuor's like, you're right, I don't know what came over me. So they keep going. And in order not to be seen by any other orcs, Tuor casts the cloak around Voronwe as well. And when they cross the main road, many orcs catch their scent, but can't see them. So the two escape and hide out for a bit. And the next morning, they can actually see in the distance the Echoriath, or the encircling mountains which surround the valley of Gondolin. They're almost there! Yay! And as they go to cross the ford of Brithiach, they notice that the eagles are still guarding the air, which is a very good thing for them, because that means no orc would dare attack them in broad daylight. They finally get to the mouth of the dry river, which cuts deep into the earth. Now remember, the dry river is the pathway to get to Gondolin. But here, Voronwe warns Tuor that their approach to the hidden city is going to be way more dangerous than any orc or bad winter, and he hopes that Ulmo really is guarding them. And Tuor takes a moment to look up at the surrounding mountains. They towered up in a fashion other than that of any mountains that he had seen, for their sides were like sheer walls, piled each one above and behind the lower, as were they great towers of many storied precipices. At this point, it's been 37 days since they set out on their journey, and they're weary, to say the least. So they spend the night in a hidden cave, and then the next morning keep going up the dry river until it goes down into the mountain itself. They press forward through pitch-black darkness for a while, and then they hear a voice speak out first in Quenya and then in Sindarin. Stand! Stir not, or you will die, be you foes or friends. And Voronwe says, We are friends. And the voice replies, Then do as we bid. Then a group of elves comes, and they shine a light on the two travelers. The main guard says that because of the law of the land, a mortal cannot come into the city. But Tuor tells him that he's on an errand from Ulmo, and so the guards let them through the first gate, the Gate of Wood, to a long, deep ravine whose narrow walls are incredibly high, so that the sky above is just like a thin blue ribbon. They soon approach the second gate, the Gate of Stone, and it's here that the guards give them food and drink and let them rest a bit, because they're really tired. Then they keep going. The third gate they pass through is called the Gate of Bronze, and after they go through it, they see even more guards, who are mostly composed of the Sindar of Nevrast, who mingled with Turgon's people a long time ago. They keep going up a very steep portion of the path to the fourth gate, the Gate of Riven Iron, which is actually made to look like many trees. The road then finally levels off, and the walls of the ravine grow wider, letting more light in. And they go through the fifth gate, the Gate of Silver, and it's here that Tuor sees white flowers growing. Now these are the same flowers that, in the future, will grow on the graves of the kings of Rohan. And they keep going until they get to the sixth gate, the Golden Gate. And beyond that, the walls of the pathway on either side get lower, so sunlight is now everywhere, and they approach the seventh and final gate, the Gate of Steel. And it's here that we meet Ecthelion of the Fountains, warden of the Great Gate. The guard presents the two travelers to Ecthelion, who says to Tuor, You have come to the last gate. Know then that no stranger who passes it shall ever go out again, save by the door of death. And Tuor, who by some sort of magic kind of starts to look more magnificent than he actually is, and he says in a voice not really his own, Speak not ill-boding. If the messenger of the Lord of Waters go by that door, then all those who dwell here will follow him. Lord of the Fountains, hinder not the messenger of the Lord of Waters. And everyone's like, okay, wow, all right. And after a moment or two, Ecthelion, who is in total awe, lets Tuor pass through the last gate. And Tuor approaches a high green area that looks out onto the valley below and the great city. And a bunch of guards and everyone are on either side looking at him in amazement, until he lets his magic cloak fall to the ground, and they all see him in the armor from Vinyamar. And many of them still remember Turgon himself wearing that same armor. Then Ecthelion says, Okay, now no further proof is needed, and even the name he claims as son of Huor matters less than this clear truth, that he comes from Ulmo himself. And this is where the tale ends.